This podcast provides a platform to discuss important questions and complex issues, challenge the status quo, and confront the boundaries of the establishment. I'm retired police chief Daniel Hahn. I went from being arrested at 16 to serving over 34 years in law enforcement. My goal is to keep you informed with news not being reported, voices not being heard, and the untold history of how we got here so that we can create a way forward. My guest today is none other than Robert Rooks, who I've known for several years. Robert Rooks is one of the nation's premier criminal justice reformers with more than 2 decades of experience as a grassroots organizer, strategist, and movement leader. Robert is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Reform Alliance. Under Robert's leadership, Reform is promoting smart reforms that reduce unnecessary supervision and create pathways to work and well-being. Reform has won major legislative reforms to transform probation and parole systems in states as diverse as California, Georgia, and Mississippi, and lifted up experiences of people on supervision to educate the public and build support for broader change. Prior to joining Reform, Robert co-founded and served as the CEO of Alliance for Safety and Justice, the largest state-by-state public safety reform organization in the nation. Throughout his career, Robert has built a pipeline of leaders, either as crime survivors or people living with old records, intimately know the failings of the criminal justice system to provide safety for communities. Prior to his leadership at ASJ, Robert served as the first criminal justice director for the NAACP, where he launched the Misplaced Priorities, Educate, Not Incarcerate campaign, partnering conservatives and liberals to reduce state prison populations. Robert also served as an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, St. Joseph's College, and Central Connecticut State University. Welcome to A Way Forward, Robert.
Chief, thank you so much for having me. Good to see you.
No, it's been a while. You've traveled across the country since I think the last time we saw each other.
Yeah, no, I have, and you retired. You moved on from your last gig, but it's been good to see you and see your leadership out there. It's important work what you're doing, and good to be on with you right now.
Yeah, it's been good to retire. I think 11 years as chief was.
I can't believe it went by so fast. I remember talking to you right before you went into that job, and just so your listeners know, they know you as an amazing chief and as an amazing thought leader, but they may not know you like I know you as a track dad. and
those were the days, man.
Those were the days. I was thinking about you with Jesse, who set up this when he told me he was going to be engineering this. I thought about when we first met, and what came to mind was, you remember that Apple commercial of the woman taking a video of her son, and then at the track meet, and he runs down, and she's running right down with him taking the video.
Now you're telling all my secrets now.
If that's you, if I've ever thought of someone, man, you used to run right down with your daughters all the way to the finish line.
You're bringing back old memories. I miss those days. I believe your sons and my daughters did the same thing. They stopped running track, and they broke my heart when they stopped running track, but they continued with other sports. So I still get to compete. So
as long as they stay active, that's the goal in my house. Stay active.
Absolutely, and good families, staying active, and they go to college like your son is and my oldest daughter is. So that's what it takes is support, which is kind of what we'll be talking about today. And before I get to my first question, you brought up track. I think that's a great way to start. To me, I know what I felt about track specifically, but sports in general for my daughters is it was way more than just athletics. It taught them so much, especially track. That first year my oldest daughter ran track, I watched her mature tremendously in just that one season. It went from walking her to the bathroom at the beginning of track season, her telling me, "Daddy, no, I got this." And that was all because of track. So,
in the line of work you're in, what do you think is the benefit for kids growing up, young adults growing up, and having a team or sports that they're involved with good coaches and those sort of things?
I mean, not even for today's generation. For me, I was active in football and track, and I see that participation is saving my life. Like, I remember the day when I made the decision to go to practice as opposed to going to do something where I was invited to do that I would have gotten in a lot of trouble for doing. And it was sports that kept me going. I can't remember a summer, a fall or a spring where I wasn't doing something in sports. And that's how I raised my sons, right? Since age 6. My youngest actually started track at 5. And, they've been in track, lacrosse, football, soccer. You think it, they've been in it. And so much of their lives have been shaped by sports, and I'm proud of them. They're good young men, making good decisions, on their way to college, never really saw themselves as not going to college, and largely that's because of sports. The other thing, to your point, in terms of what you saw in your daughter, I saw the same thing in my sons. Sports teaches independence. It teaches young people about their body, teaches them about competition, teaches them in team sports how to be a team player and a role player, and it teaches how to respond to authority. All those things are things that they're going to need to be successful in life. So I love sports. Sports has been a key part of my life and key part of my son's life. And so for society, at large, I would love for us to go back to a community that supported sports. You look at the Williams sisters in the movie, right? It's like, is there access to a tennis court? When I grew up, those boys and girls clubs and YMCA's, we don't have that anymore. It's not invested in the same way. A lot of those YMCA's turned into, health clubs. Yep. We need to go back to community centers and encouraging our young people to get off. I get the gaming, I get the computer stuff, and that's always going to be with us, but we need to encourage our young people to also get out the house, go play, go do something, be active.
It's interesting you said what you said at the beginning when you said if you didn't have, there was a time, a moment, or a day that you had a choice to go to practice or do something that would have got you in trouble.
Yeah.
And I'm one that always tells people, if you look at, since we'll be talking about the criminal justice system today, if you look at a good percentage of the people that are in custody, whether it's prison or jail or some other form of custody setting, you change one thing in their lives and they probably wouldn't be there. So in my case, I was adopted at 3 months old. So I always think if my mom hadn't adopted me, if my mom and dad hadn't adopted me, I'd have grown up bouncing around from foster home to foster home. I guarantee you my life would be different than it is now. So that's just one thing that brought many other things. But so I think that's a good jumping off place to start about criminal justice, because I think a lot of times we as a society have a different impression of who's in custody. So my first question is, when we're growing up, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure you were too, growing up, people asking me, what do you want to do when you get older, right? And, people are answering, I never answered this way, but people are answering, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a construction worker, mechanic, or, they have an answer a lot of times. I have to say, I've never heard an answer that says, I want to be a leader in the criminal justice reform industry. So I don't even know if it's an industry, and just in that kind of work, in that line of work. So how did you get involved in this work that now you've probably spent a good portion of not only your professional life, but a lot of your personal energy and life in also? So how did you get involved in this line of?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And you're right. Growing up, I used to want to be a fireman or a math teacher. I mean, those would be the answers.
Fireman?
Fireman, yeah. I'm sorry, Chief. That was it, man. In some ways, I think I am a fireman. But but yeah, so those would be the answers. But I grew up in Southern Dallas in the 80s and 90s. I saw my working class community fall apart in front of my eyes because of the influx of crack cocaine. The crack epidemic hit our neighborhood. We were a neighborhood of working class people. You know, my mom was a nurse. My neighbor was a mechanic. I had one that was a mechanic, another that was a social worker, one that owned a small beauty supply store. That was our neighborhood growing up. And when crack hit, it changed everything. People lost their homes. People became homeless. It destabilized families and impacted my own family. And I saw that shift happen in a matter of 3 to 5 years. And then later, in the early 90s, I saw violence in our communities become more of an issue. It wasn't a situation where you watch like New Jack City or, you know, these shows where, you know, police coming and cracking down on you know, crack or the violence. In the early 90s, late 80s, we were left to deal with a lot of that stuff ourselves, like the community. And there was significant, what I thought, disinvestment, and people were hurt. People were killed.
And when you say disinvestment, what do you mean?
I mean that, like, look at it now, right? I think we are doing better. You know, there's a holistic conversation happening around the opioid epidemic, right? Where there's you know, treatment programs, and it's not all invest in police, right? It's a different conversation, and that's the conversation I wish we would have had in 1980s. It was just one conversation eventually, and so you know, I lost friends to violence, and it was at my best friend's funeral that I was done. I was like, you know, I need to make sure that the next generation doesn't experience what I'm experiencing, what my friends were experiencing. So I committed myself. I didn't know what it was at that time, but to engage and change and making things different. I went to undergrad at Prairie View University, HBCU, learned a lot. And then graduate school at University of Connecticut, where I learned to be a change agent. You know, it was one of those schools that was shaped from the 70s, where talked a lot about, you know, the role of advocates, and that's was something that appealed to me. And I began knocking on doors, talking about public safety pretty early on, talking about 1997.
You right, what, 19, 20 years old, something right around there?
I was 22, I think. That's right.
You've been doing it for a while.
Been doing it for a while, yeah, for a good while. And so I remember my early conversations, Chief, talking to people really with the open-ended question, what will make your life better? And they talked to me. I was in Hartford, Connecticut, a community hit by poverty. And overwhelmingly people would say, you know, I want my kids to be able to play outside. You know, I want, you know, to not hear gunshots, you know, at night. And that involved me and engaged me in a conversation around public safety. The problem with that conversation that I learned pretty quickly was that I didn't have the resources to really respond to deal with it. You know, the only thing that was made available to the community was more cops. And as you and I have talked about, you know, police can't wrest their way out of some of these issues and problems. And so we were faced with significant challenges, but not enough support to address it. And that began my advocacy career, my learning about the failures of the criminal justice system. You know, I would see people get arrested and released, and nothing done to address the root causes of what happened. I would see people in addiction, like where I'm from, but not real access to treatment when they needed it. And that put me on the path to where I am now, where I'm advocating for real solutions to these issues. It's unfortunate 20, 25 years later, we're talking about the same stuff. You know, we're talking about the same stuff, you know.
I would even think it's longer than 25 because, you know, we keep going in these same cycles, and what I've seen and what you kind of talked about is like holistic solutions. But as we see right now, crime is starting to go up in many of these communities, and the answer for the people that maybe just a year ago were calling for reforms, their answers always seem to be send the police in.
Yeah.
Right? So we're gonna, crime starts going back up again. We go back to the same old, non-holistic solution of just sending the cops, and then crime will go down again. We'll start talking about reform, then crime will go up again, then we send in the. So
and that's what I appreciate about you when we first met. I remember coming into your office 11 so years ago. And you beat me to it. Like, you started to talk about, increasing stakeholders and solving these issues. And I was like, wow, I had met, forward thinking police before, but really appreciate it. And you were not, Sacramento's not an easy place. And you met some serious challenges, but I appreciated how you dealt with it. You always was a person with integrity. You talked straight forward to the community about it. But you also was clear that police aren't the way to solve these issues. And so I appreciate that about you. And frankly, we need to create those types of conversations all across the country. There's still a gap, especially now with, as you said, violent crime has gone up everywhere. It's not criminal justice reform as the reason. Violent crime went up in the South as much as it's gone up in the coast where reform has happened. It's just what happened after the epidemic. It's the pandemic, I would say. We for 3 years, 2.5 years, were isolated from each other, isolated from the systems that support us. Some of us became impacted in terms of our mental health, and then poverty skyrocketed, and so those are the conditions where you see crime going up. And so I think the solutions is to come together as a community to address them and solve them institution by institution. That's what I try and do in my work. And I think that's what's needed.
Well, I think experiences help, right? I grew up in a similar neighborhood as you described that was already, high poverty, and then the crack epidemic hit, and it just devastated the neighborhood even more. And my younger brother was killed in drugs in Sacramento, and I watched friends get shot. I watched my first murder when I was 9. So it's one of the reasons why I teach history, so we know how we got here. I think those experiences help us understand that some of these things we've done in the past are not going to work just because we do them again, right? And so one of the things I think people don't know, I know I didn't know, I knew you had left, but I didn't know the role that Meek Mill had in what you are doing now. So maybe talk a little bit about how Meek Mill, a rapper, a performer, what is his role in the Reform Alliance that you run now?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. Reform Alliance, we're a national organization. We exist to change laws, system, and culture to reform our nation's community supervision system, or probation and parole. We were founded after Meek was unjustly incarcerated about 5.5 years ago. You see, Meek was on probation at that time his entire adult life. And he had a judge that had an inappropriate obsession with him. I mean, the judge would tell him what music to make, whether or not.
It's part of the condition of his probation.
Yeah, well, in conversation with him, right? And where he should go and do a concert, and even try to control his purse. And so it was inappropriate. In Philadelphia, it's not uncommon for this to happen with some of the judges there. And Meek was shooting a music video and popped the wheelie on a motorbike, and she didn't like it. And so she called him in front of the courts and gave him a 2 to 4 year prison sentence as a technical violation of probation. By this time, we're talking about 5 years ago, so Philadelphia Eagles had won the Super Bowl. Meek's a huge Philly fan. His song was like the anthem that year. He became international kind of influencer, and people heard about it. People were upset, and the culture woke up on this specific issue and demanded Meek's release. And to Meek's credit, when he came out, he said that this is not just about me; it's about the 4 million people on probation and parole in this country who's free but not free, right? Who's living their lives with these stipulations that aren't aligned with their offense, and we need to do something about it. And that's how Reform Alliance was born. We exist to change laws. First, we've changed 16 pieces of legislation in 10 states, including California. We've created pathways for 650,000 people to exit the system. And now what we're doing is also partnering with organizations around employment pathways, right? Ensuring that as people get off of probation, that they get jobs, get housing, supportive services, the things that we know people need in order to ensure success. It's not brain science at this point. We know what's needed. We just need to make sure it happens.
I have a burning question. I'm curious, how does a Meek Mill, a Philadelphia Eagles fan, get along with what I'm sure is a Cowboys fan?
We don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it?
We don't talk about it.
I would appreciate it if you would remind Meek Mill that when I was in middle school, we might leave what years those were out, but my Raiders whooped up on his Philadelphia Eagles. So maybe we could remind him of something like that. So tell me, from your view of doing this work for so long, and then also now with Reform Alliance, what do you see as the biggest challenges or the things that people should be aware of the most that you feel could be better in the criminal justice system? Where do you think we're failing or not doing as good as we could in the system as a whole? What are the primary things you think we should be thinking about?
Well, Chief, I've always believed that budgets reflect our values. And we can, have the rhetoric that we should, be investing in, treatment and housing and jobs. But if we take a look at our budget, city, county, state budgets, where's the money going? And I think we need to make sure that the budget truly reflects addressing root causes of crime, getting people the help that they need, the supportive services that they need. We're a long way from there. And so if there's one thing I would say, just follow the money. And we need to make sure we got the rhetoric down. A lot, especially in California. I've met with a lot of your former colleagues, system officials, probation. These are folks that understand the problem. They talk about the problem really well. Then now it's like, okay, well, let's make sure these budgets reflect the things that we're saying, and it's not happening, and it's not happening because of one individual. I mean, it's still a cultural issue, and so we need to shift the culture.
Well, so as we talked about earlier, I'm curious your answer to this. I know I've had to be part of these conversations many times, but as we talked about earlier, crime is rising across the country, especially in large cities like New York or Philly or Sacramento. And we had a horrific crime here in Sacramento a few years ago, where this man who was on parole, he was actually a parolee at large. He broke into an elderly woman's house in, Sacramento, so in Land Park. Mm-hmm. And he murdered the woman, he sexually assaulted the woman, he killed her dog, and he tried to light her house on fire. And whenever those things happen, rightfully so, the community is petrified. They're angry. Her brothers, her family were very angry. I would be very angry. I was very disappointed as the police chief that this happened in my community. So when you talk about these reforms and you talk about reentry, and you talk about these things, at times like this, there's a growing group of people that say, forget all that. Lock these people up and don't ever let them out. And I just heard on the radio the other day, they shouldn't be getting any services inside the prison. They should be busting rocks and stuff like that. So, which, especially after a horrific crime like that, I can understand people's anger and sentiment. But what do you, as somebody that's worked on these sort of things for so many years, what is your general, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that has said that to you. So sure. What is your response to people for real reasons, right? They see crime outside their house, or they see a horrific crime like that happen, and then they respond in that way.
So, Chief, when we first met, what I was doing at that time was organizing victims of crime, right? At Californians for Safety and Justice, we organized, a network of victims who had experienced crime and violence themselves. Many had lost sons and daughters to violence. Some who experienced sexual assault, and we organized them to have a voice in what should happen in criminal justice policymaking and decision making. We did that not because we have a singular perspective on the matter. We did that because in many of these conversations in the Capitol, Sacramento, Black, brown, and poor voices, victims of crime, voices were not heard in these discussions. And what all we were doing was say, hey, listen, there's multiple perspectives here. And I heard all of it. We would have meetings with victims, and some, would, break my heart and say, listen, how do I talk about restorative justice? How do I talk about, healing when the person that murdered my son is still at large?
Right.
Like how is that? Like, how is that? Like walk me through that. And then we would have, the person right next to her who has, lost their son as well, but is getting involved, making sure that that mental health centers are built, treatment and community centers are built, because they don't want their son's loss to be in vain, right? They want something good to come out of it, and they're sitting right next to each other,
right?
And so to me, that's the conversation, right? It's not that Robert, have the solutions. I just think the wrong people are at the table, and we need to get the right people at the table. But when it comes to like when those moments happen, right? What do leaders like us, like what do we say? I say, we have to support and empathize best we can with the victim. We have to understand what happened, right? Understand what about the criminal justice system broke down, right? Usually there's something that happened, and so we need to understand that, and then we need to then advance, real solutions that are rooted in what happened and what often concerns me, and is that moments like that create so much anxiety and concern that lawmakers then want to respond to that moment.
They do. They usually
and
do.
not and not respond to like what's been happening to the community at large for the last
Right.
6 months, a year, 3 years. So that would be my intervention as a leader is, hey, listen, okay, let's study what happened. Let's not jump to reactions. Let's not create a whole new law and name it after somebody, right? That we're going to have to deal with for the next 20 years. Let's actually see what happened and bring everyone at the table to lean in and share their voice. So that would be my approach.
It's so interesting you say the right people at the table. As I've, over the years, I've had the privilege to meet a bunch of people, many of which have become good friends of mine that spent 20 plus years in prison.
Yeah.
Now they're out doing great things. Like here in Sacramento, there's an organization that was started called Brother to Brother by several people. They've all been in prison, and the co-founder, Merv Brookins, spent 21 years in prison, including in Pelican Bay. And those that know the criminal justice system know how you get to Pelican Bay. But he's doing amazing things right now. And I can tell you, I grew up in Oak Park, but I've only spent 4 hours in a cell at juvenile hall. I've never been to prison other than on a tour.
Right.
And I went home after the tour. I didn't go to a cell. And so over the years as police chief, I've been asked countless times, I don't even know how many times, what needs to be done with reentry, with the criminal justice system, but specifically reentry. And so what I've tried to do is like, you can ask me and I'll have an opinion, but you need to ask somebody like Merv.
100%.
Somebody that was in there for 21 years and has successfully come out. And I can tell you, I thought I was pretty well versed in the criminal justice system and reentry and things like that. But I was pretty naive. And I realized that after talking to Merv, and he started bringing up, putting me into scenarios. What would you do if you were a parole agent and this happened? And he hit me to stuff that I never thought of because I've never been there before. And so when you say the right people at the table, to me, you and I have college degrees. To me, Merv Brookins has a degree too. It's just
100%.
And we have to value his experiences just as much as we value your and my formal experience at a university or something.
Yeah, you're so right. And you and I talked about the spike in violent crime. What I've seen, and some of the data is starting to show, is that the reason why we're managing it, and in some places that spike is actually starting to come down, is because of interventionists, right? People like Merck, people that have been on the inside, people that have kind of been out there on the streets when they were young. Now they're giving back by taking guns out of kids' hands. I know for sure in Newark, New Jersey, they have reduced their violent crime 5 years in a row through COVID because they have budgeted for interventionists to go in and address some of the issues in the community.
Which helps all people.
Everyone.
It helps everybody.
Everyone. And so 100% folks like Merck, interventionists, people on the ground that are really, they're really the true heroes for me, because they don't have to do what they do. They went inside, they've served their time. They could come out and do any number of things, but they're choosing to go back many times in the community where they were in to negotiate peace and help keep us safe. And so truly, they should be at the table. People that's been impacted by violence, diverse people who've been impacted by violence should be at the table. I would rather have them at the table than me anyway. They can tell us what to do for sure.
I just always remember, I mentioned my younger brother was murdered in our city after he unfortunately got involved with drugs. And I can remember people asking me, because this was a repeat offender that killed him. And I remember being asked, do I want him to get the death penalty? And my answer, even in the moment, even when you're angry and still hurt, and actually I was also in disbelief. Like I couldn't believe my brother had been killed in my city, in my beat, while I'm working. I couldn't believe it. And my answer was, I don't care, because it won't bring my brother back. And so I think people would be surprised about, you just mentioned, and I'd love that you continue to mention, have victims at the table. And I think people would be surprised at what some of victims of some pretty bad crimes think. So last question I have for you is, what do you think are, in places like California for sure, and I know in other states too, there are more people coming out of prison than there were, for example, when I first started shortly out as a police officer, shortly after 3 strikes laws and the get tough on crime and the zero tolerance that was really a result of the crack epidemic and the increasing crime. So now there's a lot more people returning back to community from custody settings than there was back then. So whether you like it or not, people are returning to the community. So what do you think are the biggest things that the public at large needs to know, or at least you feel they need to know, that is needed in regards to reentry, to people that have been locked up for, say, 10, 20 years in that environment that are coming back to our community? What are some of the biggest needs to have the best chance of that being successful for all people, for the person returning, for the communities, for the criminal justice system even? What do you think are the biggest things that are needed in reentry?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, Chief, thank you for sharing that story about your brother. Thank you for letting us all into your thoughts and emotions around it and what you said at the time. It means a lot to the conversation. So I really, really do appreciate that. Appreciate you for sharing it. So that's thing one. I want to hold that. The second thing in terms of your question, it's not it's I don't think it's rocket science at this point. I think I said that before, but people, first of all, they need not to deal with stigma. Right. One of the things that I'm trying to do at Reform is use our large megaphone. We have influencers and celebrity on our board, folks we have access to. It's my hope, it's my dream that it's second nature to hire someone that's been in the system. It's like, of course we would, like everyone deserves second, sometimes third, fourth chance, right? And so that's what I hope is that we begin to mainstream and normalize that language. It's important, I think, for us as a society, but it's also important to message back to the person coming out, because what we're starting to find just in talking to people, at Reform, we do these job fairs all across the country. We had 6,000 people registered in New York City. We did it in Brooklyn. We had 5,000 people registered. I mean, we try to do it big, try to do it in partnership with the NBA team. Hopefully we can come out west, later this year or next. But what we find out when we do these job fairs for people that's been in the system is that a lot of them don't even believe they're employable, like, or worthy of employment themselves, right? Like themselves. And
they
we
grow
need
up in our same society too,
right. And they get the
messages about themselves.
And they get the messages, and we got to do something about that. Like we have to create safe spaces for people to come home, and to work and get reconnected back to family and community. I'm committed to that in terms of my work. So
Robert, let me interject real quick. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
yeah.
I mentioned before we got on today a guy named Rodney, and who went to Highlands Community Charter School, and I will never forget why he said he went there. So he had done several years in prison. He got out, and Highlands actually tracked him down, and one official at Highlands even drove back from out of town to meet with them because he was at the office at the time. And he said the reason why he went there is it's the first time in his life that people cared about him and weren't looking for something in return from him. He goes, my entire life, if somebody was going to do something for me, that meant they wanted something back. And he goes, and so he was talking about what you just talked about, this stigma that you believe yourself. I don't think he thought he was worth much until people started pouring into him. And then he went to Highlands. He's doing good stuff now.
It's so important. And we missed that in the criminal justice discussion, right? We go straight to policy, or we go straight to programs. But there's a lot we need to do in society and culture and stereotypes and barriers that are out there that people feel. We feel it as Black men, right? I mean, that's a different conversation, but it's this similar thing, right? You kind of feel, you take in certain things that society puts out that is heavy for people that's been in the system, and so I want to help do something about that. So that's one. Two, I think housing is critical. Jobs, employment pathways, entrepreneurship is critical, and supportive services. When I say supportive service, I mean it broadly. If someone's been dealing with addiction, right, make sure those services are there. Mental illness, make sure those services are there, right? So we need those types of services available on demand, really, to get people reintegrated back to society, reconnect with family, and successful as they exit. Those are the things that I talk about, because when I talk to people, that's what I hear the most is housing and job. I had breakfast this morning with folks at Fresh, and Fresh is a new company that gives bank accounts for people coming out of the system, because some people come out with only their prison ID. It's hard to get state ID, and if you don't have state ID, then you're going to work, then you're only dealing with these cash agencies, right? And they hit you 30, 40, it's ridiculous. And so you get taxed there. So Fresh offers you bank account on the spot as you exit the system. Like, I love that stuff. Like, we need to do more and create the supportive environment to ensure people's success.
And what always surprises me is some people, I shouldn't say all, but certain segment of our society call those handouts. But if you've been successful in your life, and if you've been around successful people, everybody has had assistance in one way or another.
100%.
Nobody gets to where they're at without help from somebody else. But some people we don't believe, I guess, deserve that help. But I think it's always good to remember that we've all had help. Nobody got to where we're at in successful wise without help. So, hey, I don't want to hold you much longer, but I want to make sure that, I love that you have always been like this, and you've actually said it a few times today, that you're not one of those kind of people that beats down other people for their opinion. You're somebody that welcomes various opinions. You're not somebody that thinks everybody should think exactly the same. So if there's somebody listening to the show and they might not agree with everything you said, but they also agree that we need to do something to help people be successful, even if they've made mistakes and gone into a custody setting. How can somebody that's been inspired by what you say today and the work that you do and so many other people do, how can they get involved? How can they help? How can they help create a better tomorrow for all people?
Yeah, thanks, Chief, for the question. First, I would say text us. We have a text link. Text reform to 81411, and there you can join our community. We communicate to our members a couple of times a week.
Can you say that again?
Reform 81411.
Okay.
And so we communicate to our members a couple of times a week. We let them know when legislation is being introduced, or when we're going to be in your neck of the woods, or when we're doing an event, a job fair. So that's one. Just join our community, see what we're about. Go on our website. So that's one. Two, if you want to get involved, there are a number of ways you can. One, we're looking for partners. So there are organizations out there that are providing reentry support. We want to partner with you. Like, we want to see what you're seeing, what you're hearing on the ground, as it relates to the challenges people on probation and parole face. So we look for those partners. We have a grants program where we grant money to community organizations. So let us know there if that's of interest to you. If you have been impacted by the system, if you've been on probation and parole and was revoked and sent back in for a technical violation or something that just doesn't make sense, we want to hear from you. And if it works out for you, we want to share your story. Share your story on our platforms. Perhaps there's legislation we can influence, and you can be a part of that. That's key. And if you're at home and you're a donor and you like, you know what, I like what this organization is doing. We're creating real change, and we'll continue to do that with your help. Send us a check. Right? Like, to do this work, we need resources. As I mentioned, we ensure that we grant our money, so it's not all coming to us. We try to build ecosystems to advance the work, but it doesn't happen without resources. And so on our website, you can see where you could email us and begin the conversation about how you can help us continue this work.
One of the big purposes of A Way Forward is to hear different voices and different opinions, because that is how we can make informed decisions ourselves. So if you are someone that would like to come on A Way Forward to express your opinion, go to chiefhahn.com/podcast. Chief, HAHN.com/podcast.